Welcome back. It's an exciting day because we're going to go up one rung on our ladder and we're going to reach the top of our levels of linguistic analysis. We're done with syntax, and today it's semantics. All right. So let's recall the notions of form and the notions of meaning that we introduced all the way back in the basics. Remember that a sign is a pairing of a form and a meaning. Now, form is going to be something like a sentence, and meaning is going to be, well, it's the meaning evoked by that sentence. Maybe it's like the image in your mind, or maybe it's an actual furry creature which is being referred to by this sentence. Previously, we've thought a lot about form. Basically, all the levels of analysis we've been looking at so far have been primarily about form. We saw that we can think about form in terms of a sequence of phonemes, or we can think about it in terms of a morphological analysis or a syntactic tree. Now, in semantics, we're going to turn our full attention on the meaning side of the coin. What is meaning? What exactly is this thing, and what is its structure? Recall the principle of compositionality. I introduced this principle when we were talking about syntax. Compositionality says that the meaning of a whole, like a sentence, the meaning of a whole sentence is the meaning of the parts plus how they are combined. Now, when we were studying syntax, we were thinking a lot about how the parts are combined to form sentences. But now we're going to be thinking about the other side of things. What happens, what is the meaning of each part, and what is the meaning that results when they are combined? So in compositionality, that means that a part of the form systematically refers to a part of the meaning. Like if the form has the noun phrase the cat, then the meaning is something that involves this creature. If it has a PP, a prepositional phrase like on the mat, then it's going to refer to something sitting on a mat like this. And the verb refers to then the relationship between the cat and the thing that it's sitting on. And so we see that there's a structure to the form, and there's also a corresponding structure to the meaning. Okay, so now it's time to get down to the big question. Now that we're at semantics, it's time to ask, what is meaning? I've been talking about meaning in a necessarily vague way. I've been like showing you pictures of cats and saying, oh, that's meaning. But that's pretty vague, right? Everything we've done so far has been really systematic. I think you'll agree it's been quite almost mechanical how we've been analyzing things. But when it comes to meaning, I've been really vague. And so semantics is going to be applying that same level of rigor to this idea of meaning. And it's going to involve a lot of logic. This is the point where linguistics makes contact with logic. So if we want to talk about what meaning is, we're going to have to start by distinguishing two kinds of meaning, two aspects of linguistic meaning. So there's actually two things that you might mean when you talk about meaning, and they are sense and reference. And we're going to be spending a lot of this lecture learning to distinguish these two ideas of meaning, sense versus reference. Sense is the mental representation of a meaning, the meaning of a word or the meaning of a sentence. It's something like the concept that you get in your mind when you hear the word table. Reference, on the other hand, the second kind of meaning, reference is the actual entities in the world that are being referred to by an utterance. So if I say that table, and I'm pointing at a particular table that you can see, then the reference of that utterance is actually the table itself, the physical table, not anything in your mind. The reference is the physical table out there in the world. So for example, let's consider a conversation between these two ladies. Let's say one of the ladies is talking about that cup that's on the table. And so she says, that cup. All right, so she says, that cup. That's going to evoke some mental concept in the mind of the woman she's talking to. She's going to think about something like a cup. That thing in her mind, that concept, is the sense of the utterance, that cup. The reference, on the other hand, is the actual physical cup itself on the table. So the sense is the concept, the reference is the actual thing that's being referred to. So sense is a mental representation of the meaning of a linguistic expression. Reference is the set of real objects in the world that a linguistic expression in a particular utterance refers to. Now, let's take a moment to think about the subtleties that arise based on these two definitions. We see that it's possible for some expressions to have sense, but no reference. What would that mean? Can you think of what that might mean? An example would be a unicorn. Suppose I tell you something about a unicorn. Now that clearly has a sense. You know what a unicorn is. You get an image in your mind of what a unicorn is. If you actually saw a unicorn in real life, you would identify it correctly as a unicorn. So it does have a sense. This word has a sense, which is something like it's a horse-like, four-legged creature with one horn on its forehead, and maybe it has magical powers, and so on. So this creature. But what is the reference? What is the reference of a unicorn? It's the empty set. Remember, reference is the set of real objects in the world that are being referred to. In this case, it's an empty set because there are no unicorns in the real world. Now, it would have reference in other worlds, in fictional worlds, but in our world, it has no reference, although it does have sense. So there are lots of examples of expressions that have sense, but they don't have any reference. Things like the Queen of the United States. You know what that means. You have a mental concept for that. If there were a Queen of the United States, you would be able to recognize her. But the set of people this refers to is the empty set. There is no Queen of the United States currently. The tie that I'm wearing. Do you see a tie? Well, you know what it means. You know what the tie that I'm wearing means. It has a sense. There's something in your mind that you get out of the sense, but it doesn't refer to any actual tie in the world. The first person on Mars. Well, when this does happen, we hope, then you will be able to identify that person. So you know what this means. It has a sense in your mind, but it has no referent in the world yet. And so on. There are very, very many expressions that have sense but no reference. And this should help you distinguish between sense and reference, these two different aspects of linguistic meaning. It's also possible to have multiple senses but the same reference. So for example, here's a noun phrase, the most populous country in the world. It has some sense. It is in your mind. It is the concept of the country that has the most people in it. Also, here's another expression, the country that hosted the 2008 Olympics. Okay, well, that has a different sense. That has a different mental representation in your mind. The concept here is different. But it happens to be the case that the reference of these two noun phrases is the same. It happens to be the case currently that both of these expressions refer to the country of China. But you can see that they have different senses. So the most populous country in the world and the country that hosted the 2008 Olympics, they have different senses but the same reference. One way you can tell the senses are different is that it's possible in the future or the past that the reference for these expressions might diverge into two different things. So maybe in the future, China might not be the most populous country in the world anymore. And at that point in the future, the reference of these two senses will be different, corresponding to the fact that the senses are different. But right now, the references happen to be the same. Also, it's possible for you to know that China is the most populous country in the world, but maybe you don't know that China is the country that hosted the 2008 Olympics. So you can know one of the senses without knowing the other one. That shows that the senses are different things. The senses of these two expressions are different, even though the referent happens to be the same currently. So we've seen that an expression can have sense without having reference. We've seen that an expression can have different senses. Two expressions can have two different senses, but they can have the same reference. So sense you can think of as kind of like the definition of a word, although we're going to have to extend that notion also to sentences, and we're going to see that this idea of definition doesn't really quite work. Reference you can think of as the actual objects, the physical objects in the world that are picked out by a word in context. So the set of objects in the world that match the definition given by the sense, well, that's the reference. So the sense, you can kind of think of that as a way to pick out objects in the world, and the reference is the objects that are actually picked out in that way. So now I'm going to introduce another distinction, which is compositional versus lexical semantics. These are sort of two kinds of semantics, two sub-branches within the scientific field of semantics. And we're going to be talking about lexical semantics first, but let's define what they are first. Semantics is the study of the form, how the form of a linguistic expression relates to its meaning in terms of sense and reference. Lexical semantics is the study of the sense and reference of words. Compositional semantics is the study of how the meanings of words combine together to form the meanings of sentences. Okay, so it's going to be lexical semantics for the rest of today. The first question we'll need to ask is, what is the sense of a word? We're going to be concerned with the sense of a word and the reference of a word. What do we mean by the sense of a word? And that really means, how does the mind represent the sense of a word? Because the sense of a word is something like the mental representation of its meaning, or it's the concept which is evoked by the word. How are these word meanings stored in your mind? So, what have you got? When you know the meaning of a word, what is it that you know? What does that knowledge look like? Does it look like syntactic rules? Probably not. We're going to see that this is actually a surprisingly thorny question. So remember in the first lecture I said linguistics is a relatively new science. Well, this is one of the areas which we surprisingly don't understand very well yet. What is the sense of a word and how does the mind represent it? Here is one theory for how the mind might store and represent the sense of a word. A dictionary style definition. So this is like hypothesis number one. The idea here is that your mind stores something like the definition of a word like you would find it in a dictionary. So a dictionary definition defines the sense of a word in terms of other words. So for example, the word proud could be defined in a dictionary as feeling or showing pride. So maybe the knowledge that you have in your head associated with the word proud looks like this definition. Maybe when you know this word, what you know is that the word means feeling or showing pride. A dictionary style definition in your head. Here's another example of a word, divine. The definition would be something like being or having the nature of a deity. But let's think about if this can really work. So what about a word like this, pride? Pride is the quality or state of being proud. Okay, what about deity? Well, a deity is a divine entity. So do you see the problem here? Do you see the problem with these definitions? They're circular. So if I want to know what proud means, I say it means feeling or showing pride. But then I want to know what pride means, and I get the quality or state of being proud. And I want to know what proud means, and so I go and look up proud again, and it just goes in a big circle. So when you define words in terms of other words, it turns out you cannot escape this circularity. Dictionary definitions are circular. And so the way that we store senses of words in our mind, the sense of a word, is probably not a dictionary style definition because of this circularity problem. Okay, so here's another idea for how your mind might represent the sense of a word. Maybe it's a mental image. And this is kind of like what I've been doing in this class when I show you pictures of cats and say, well, that's the meaning of the word cat. Maybe the sense of a word is something like a mental image that pops up in your mind's eye when you hear a word or read a word or feel a word in Braille or whatever. So like maybe the meaning of the sense of Mona Lisa for you is this actual image. Maybe what your mind stores actually is an image. So can this work? It does seem intuitive, right? Words do seem to conjure up mental images. So maybe those are the word senses. For example, when I say bird, say the word bird, you're going to get a bunch of images in your mind, and maybe they look something like this little guy. But here's a problem. These things are also birds, No one would disagree that these things are birds. But when I say bird, this is probably not the image. You probably didn't think of a penguin when I said the word bird. You probably thought of some more prototypical bird. So if the sense of the word bird is this image, then in what sense can we say that penguins are birds, right? It doesn't seem to work. Another problem with this idea of mental images is that different people get very different images for the same word, depending on all kinds of things. So let's think about the word food, and let's hypothesize that maybe the sense of the word food is an image. Now, a problem is going to occur because this little young guy, when he hears the word food, is going to think of something that looks like this. This might be the mental image that pops in the mind of this fellow for the word food. Whereas this guy, this very serious chef, when he hears the word food, I think the image that comes to his mind is going to be very, very different. It's going to be something more like very, very elegant lamb chops or something. So the mental images here are very different. Do we really want to say, though, that the sense of the word is different for the child and for the chef? No, we want to say the sense is roughly the same. So the images evoked by the word are different, but the sense seems like it should be the same. And we conclude that word senses are not really well thought of as images. So scratch that. And now I'll turn to a third option for what is the sense of a word and how is it represented in the mind. And this is going to be something like the least bad of our options so far. Like I said, this is still somewhat of a mystery. We don't really quite have a grip on what the sense of a word is. But this is currently our best guess. This is currently the scientific best guess. Usage-based definitions. So what's a usage-based definition? A usage-based definition defines the sense of a word in terms of the contexts that the word can be used in. So for example, here's a word ong choi. Maybe you've heard this word before, maybe not. Many of you have not heard this word ong choi before. But let's say we list the sentences that the word ong choi actually appears in and that it can appear in. Well, it can show up, it turns out, in contexts like this. Ong choi is delicious sauteed with garlic. Ong choi is superb over rice. Ong choi leaves with salty sauces. So what is ong choi? Just based on these contexts, you can start to understand what ong choi is, right? It's some kind of edible leafy vegetable. So if you know what ong choi means, then you know how to use it with other words. And if you see other words in those same contexts, you know that their sense is similar. So you also see words like spinach in contexts like spinach sauteed with garlic over rice, or words like chard in contexts like charred stems and leaves are delicious. Collard greens and other salty leafy greens, you see collard greens in these same kinds of contexts that you see ong choi in, and therefore you can conclude that the sense of ong choi is similar to the sense of spinach, chard, and collard. So usage-based definitions hold, and remember, we don't quite know exactly how the human brain represents word meanings, but usage-based definitions are based on the intuition that if you know the sense of a word, you know when it can be used. And maybe the sense of a word really just is a set of conditions on when the word can be used. So we use usage-based definitions for now. The sense of a word refers to the contexts in which that word can be used. Now let's turn to the reference of a word. And this turns out to actually be a lot simpler. It's a much more clean-cut thing. It looks a lot more like set theory and logic when we turn now to reference of a word instead of the sense of a word. So words have different kinds of reference. A proper name, a word like Mary or Bob, a proper name refers to a single particular entity in the world. So for example, the word China is a proper name and it refers to a single country. Its reference is a single entity in the world. This proper name, Nicolas Cage, refers to one particular individual in the world. One particular individual, not a set of individuals, one particular individual. What about a common noun? What about the word cat in a sentence like, does Sally have a cat? Then what does cat refer to? What is the reference of the common noun cat in a sentence like, does Sally have a cat? Question mark. So could it be a particular cat? No, because maybe Sally doesn't have a cat. Maybe the answer is no. No, Sally has never had a cat. In a sentence like, Sally has never had a cat, the word cat is clearly not referring to a particular entity in the world, because there is no cat that Sally had. Rather, we say that the common noun, cat, refers to the set of all cats in the world. And in general, a common noun refers to a set of entities. So the word cat refers to the set of all cats in the world. What then is the reference of an adjective? When we talk about the reference of a noun, it's kind of easy because it's pointing out particular entities in the world. A cat is an actual entity that you can point to. But what is the reference of an adjective, a word like blue or green or big or small? What could the reference of an adjective be? So the way we set this up is we say that the reference of an adjective, like green, is the set of all things describable by that adjective. So the reference of the adjective green is the set of all the things in the world that are green, like leaves and avocados and Kermit the Frog and green M&Ms and so on, and this guy. So the reference of an adjective is the set of all things in the world that can be described with that adjective. How about the reference of an intransitive verb? Well, this seems even trickier, right? Because now an intransitive verb, that's about an action. That's not about an entity, right? An intransitive verb, that's something like Bob slept, when I say slept. So what does slept refer to? So similarly to how we define the reference of an adjective, we're going to define the reference of an intransitive verb as the set of all things in the world that can be described currently with that intransitive verb. So it's going to be the set, the reference of the verb walks is going to be the set of all the things in the world that are walking. Like this fellow and this family and these people, they're all walking. So a proper name refers to a single particular entity in the world, not a set. It refers to a single entity. A common noun refers to a set of entities in the world that are describable by the noun. An adjective also refers to a set of entities in the world describable by that adjective. And an intransitive verb refers to the set of entities that can be described by that intransitive verb. Now, I'm going to continue talking about lexical semantics, and I'm going to think about the relationships between words. So all the words in a language are linked together in a web of semantic relationships which you can define in terms of their reference. So for example, the word dog has some particular relationship with the word poodle, right? So all poodles are dogs, but not all dogs are poodles. The word dog is also related to this other word animal, because a dog is a kind of animal. And the word cat is also related to animal. So all the words in a language are related to each other in this sort of web of relationships expressing how the meaning of one word relates to the meaning of another word. Also, cow would be an animal. We define these relationships among words using their reference. And that's because, as we saw, the sense of a word is still sort of a thorny question, but the reference of a word is well understood. So we're going to define the relationships between words in terms of their reference, in terms of the things they refer to or the sets of things that they refer to. So let's focus in on this connection between the word dog and the word poodle. What is the relationship between these two words? So let's think about the reference. Remember, these relationships will be defined always in terms of reference. So dog is a common noun. It refers to the set of all dogs in the world, these creatures. The word poodle refers to a set of creatures in the world, which is contained within the larger set of dogs, right? So we see that the set of entities referred to by poodle is a subset of the set of entities referred to by dog. So the reference of poodle is a subset of the reference of dog, because all poodles are dogs, but not all dogs are poodles. So we have a name for this. We say that poodle is a hyponym of dog. So hypo this is a Greek prefix that means under. So it's kind of like it's lower in a taxonomy of creatures. It's a smaller set. So poodle is a hyponym of dog. That means that the reference of poodle is a subset of the reference of dog. And flipping it around, we could say that the word dog is a hypernym of poodle. So hyper is a Greek prefix that means over. So a dog is a hypernym of poodle. That means it's like a bigger name. It's an overarching category. So that means that the set of entities referred to by the word dog is a superset of the set of entities referred to by poodle. So dog is the hypernym, poodle is the hyponym. And this kind of relationship is called hypernymy. And we say X is a hypernym of Y if and only if the reference of Y is a subset of the reference of X. Similarly, we say X is a hyponym of Y if and only if the reference of Y is a superset of the reference of X. So the relationship between dog and poodle looks something like this. Poodles are a subset of dogs, so poodle's the hyponym, dogs is the hypernym. We could also situate dogs within a larger set, the set of all mammals, which would mean that mammal is a hypernym of dog. Now, how about the relationship between these two words, groundhog and woodchuck? So, it turns out groundhog refers to this set of creatures. And woodchuck refers to exactly the same set of creatures. So these words mean the same thing. They have exactly the same reference. When two words have exactly the same reference like this and they refer to the same set of entities, we call them synonyms. Synonyms are two words that have the same reference. So X and Y are synonyms if and only if they have the same reference. Now, how about these pairs of words? There's going to be some relationship between these pairs of words, between good and bad, between alive and dead, between old and young. Now, just looking at this, you might remember these things are called antonyms. Antonyms are words that express opposites. But we're going to see that we actually need to define different kinds of antonyms. So what are these relationships? They are antonyms. X and Y are antonyms if and only if their references contrast in some way. But there's lots of different ways that references can contrast. So, for example, two words X and Y can be complementary antonyms if and only if there is no entity that is simultaneously in the reference of both X and Y. So this would be something like alive and dead. There is nothing that is both alive and dead. So alive refers to some particular set of things, some set of entities in the world that are alive. Dead refers to some other set of entities in the world that are dead, and there's no overlap between the sets. And so these are what we call complementary antonyms. Complementary antonyms are words whose references contrast in the sense that there is no overlap between them. Here's a test for whether two words are complementary antonyms. You just ask, does not X imply Y, and vice versa? If yes, then X and Y are complementary antonyms. So just ask yourself, if someone is not dead, does that mean they're alive? Well, yes, if it's a person and they're not dead, then they're alive. It's the only other option. Similarly, if someone is not alive, does that mean they're dead? Yes, because the only options are alive or dead. So those are complementary antonyms. What about things like this? Hot versus cold. What's going on here? So hot and cold refer roughly to states of affairs in the world that have certain temperatures. So hot refers to the set of states of the world that have high temperature. Cold refers to the set of environments that have low temperature. Now, are these complementary antonyms? If something is not cold, does that imply that it's hot? Well, not quite, right? If something is not cold, it still might not be hot. It might be lukewarm. Might be in the middle. So not cold does not imply hot, and not hot does not imply cold. These are not complementary antonyms. They're something else. Hot and cold are not complementary antonyms. They are what we call gradable antonyms. Gradable antonyms identify different directions on a scale. So temperature is a scale. You can have something which is extremely high on the scale or extremely low on the scale. Hot and cold identify those extremes, two different directions on the scale, but they're not complementary. So hot and cold are gradable antonyms. So we've seen that all words in a language are linked in a web of semantic relationships. And we've looked at a few of the major kinds of relationships among words. And if you take a class in lexical semantics, you're going to learn a lot more of these kinds of relationships. So some of these relationships are things like hypernyms. Two words are hypernyms if one names a superset of the other. Two words are hyponyms if one names a subset of the other. Two words are synonyms if they have the same reference. Two words are antonyms if they have contrasting references. And how might those references contrast? Well, you can have complementary antonyms in case that the references are mutually exclusive, or you could have gradable antonyms in the case that they name different ends of a scale, like hot and cold, or tall and short.